Welcome to the Sens Spotlight podcast brought to you by the Sick Podcast Network. Before we get started, go all the way with Betway and get a free bet up to $200 if your first bet loses. Scan the QR code on the screen or click on the link in the details section to create an account and redeem your welcome offer. Offer is only available for new customers. Terms and conditions apply. Offer available in Ontario. Must be 18 plus. Please bet responsibly. And before we get started, today's episode, we will have Julian McKenzie of The Athletic, a good friend of mine. It should be always fun. Julian brings a ton of energy, so it should be a fun show. And hit it, Shane.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Sens Spotlight.
Here's Alfredson bursts the speed, gets a shot away, score! Daniel Alfredson ends the game in overtime and sends the Ottawa Senators to the Stanley Cup final for the first time in franchise history.
The sickest Ottawa Senators podcast. It's gonna be sick.
And let's get to Julian McKenzie. And there you go. He is joining us from somewhere in Ottawa. We won't say where, but Julian, thanks so much for taking the time and doing this. Before we get started, how have you been liking Ottawa? I know it's been a year on the job here covering the team.
Not yet.
How's it been for you so far?
Not
Not
yet.
yet, yeah.
No, I think first week of October it'll be officially a year. I have not. When we get to training camp in like a week, that'll be my first time covering training camp for the Ottawa Senators. That'll be fun. It's been a whirlwind, but I've had a lot of fun. Ottawa's a really cool city. Really enjoyed getting to know the fans, getting to know media members like yourself and Graham Nichols. Obviously, we got our little like triangle. We got our trio going on.
Triangle
as a
of Doom.
friend
I don't know.
I don't know if we strike enough fear in people's hearts.
No,
for
I
Doom,
don't think so.
No, I'm really happy with covering this team, especially at a really interesting time. You know, they make the playoffs for the first time in 8 years last year, and they're trying to find a way to handle expectations this year. Like, it's a really, really interesting beat, and I'm really happy to be a part of it.
Is that something like I know we've talked about it a little bit, but that really drew you to trying to come to Ottawa in terms of just seeing where the team was at? And obviously they're in a different position last year where it's like, hey, they should be making the playoffs, but they haven't so far, but now they have taken that hurdle. But did you feel like, hey, this is kind of like an exciting team to join on it and cover?
Yeah, it definitely played a part in my decision. In my head, entering last year, my thought was this team is either going to make the playoffs and everyone is going to get behind that and everyone's going to be really excited, or they're going to miss the playoffs. And at that point, everyone's going to be looking around wondering, well, what's next? And tensions and frustrations would probably be on a high, and questions would be going around about Brady Tkachuk and the rest of the core. And there would be doubts about what Steve Staios is doing, doubts about what Travis Green is doing. There would be a lot of fires. I think that a lot of people someone would have to find a way to put them up, but there would be a lot of fires in an alternate world where the Ottawa Senators don't realize their potential and miss the playoffs, especially if a team like Montreal or Buffalo found a way to make the playoffs with the rebuilds they had going on. So I think just considering those storylines that played a big role in why I wanted to move. But I mean, ultimately, a lot of it was more just like personal stuff, just being closer to home, I should say. Sorry. My family's from Montreal. We all live in Montreal. I should say my mom is from Jamaica. My dad's from Trinidad and Tobago, but we all live in Montreal. And being a 2-hour drive from them versus a 4.5-hour flight out in Alberta, that played a really big, that was really big for me and why I ultimately decided to make the move.
I'm curious because you mentioned just off the top about how this team, there was all these alternate storylines and there could have been all these fires last year. It feels the exact opposite this year where it seems like everything's dandy, everything's rosy. The team's going to become, a cup contender or maybe not, going to win the cup next year, but one of the upper echelon teams. But, you have to play the games, right? And I wonder what are those maybe concerns that you have about this team? And what do you think those expectations are for this team after they've taken that jump into becoming a playoff team? Like that next step is kind of harder, to go deep. Just look at the Leafs that struggled to make it out of the first round for years.
I think we should start with where they at as with where they are at as a playoff team. I think the Senators have put together a roster that should be good enough to make the playoffs this year, maybe even next year as well. A lot of it will be dependent on how the players internally will take that next step. But I still see a team on the surface that is just a playoff team and is, I mean, they're not a middle team. They're above the middle, but they're not an upper echelon contending team yet. And again, that's dependent on the players, but I still think this team is maybe 1 or 2 moves away from doing that. Where's that top 6 forward coming from? Who's going to be able to play on the top line with Tim Stützle and or Brady Tkachuk? If depending on where you want to slot him, obviously he's a first line guy, but there's been times where maybe you put him on a second, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
I just think with the way that this roster's set and with the way this division is set too, Ottawa, as long as they progress, it's still a win. But as long as Florida's still a cup contending team, as long as Toronto still proves to be a veritable playoff team, I can't count out Tampa until they fall out of playoff contention. Where does Montreal fit? I think they're below the Sens, but I don't think they're jumping over them. I liked how the Sens approached it at the end of last year, where they knew entering the season there was going to be a target on their back. And I very much think that's going to be a thing for them entering this year. It's, okay, this team made it into the playoffs. If we want to take that step, that's the team we have to jump. That's what you have to be thinking if you're a team like Detroit, for example. I know a lot of people, like myself included, were not that crazy about some of the moves they did in the offseason. No. But if the Detroit Red Wings want to make the playoffs, they're looking at the Ottawa Senators and the Montreal Canadiens as teams to jump in a wild card position, right? So I think for this team, I'd like to see more scoring from them. They didn't do enough last year. I wonder how many of those guys on the team are able to do that. And I wonder how much of it will come down to Steve Stamkos making a move to put a veritable top 6 guy who can bury some of those chances on a top line and whether it's a 5-on-5 on the man advantage, what have you, put them in a position where they don't have to worry about scoring compared to some of the other attributes they're really good.
I think that's an interesting point because you look at the team and they're really deep. I think their forward group, they're basically all good to very good to like legitimate NHLers from Amadio, Eller, Perron. Like they're a very deep team, but you wouldn't say that they have a ton of elite offense outside of Timmy, Brady Tkachuk. And then it's like, okay, Drake Batherson's been a 60-point guy, but that's kind of his ceiling, it seems like, to some degree, right? But the good news about that is that they're in that position where, I find it hard to see them being bad this year or kind of taking a huge step back just because they are really deep at the forward position, even on defense. Like I think, we've talked about it, off air with Graham Nichols and us in our group chat, but just about how the upgrade from Jordan Spence from Travis Hamonic, I think, is pretty significant. And we'll see what Nick Jensen is as well, because I think his injury status is going to really affect this team. And I don't know, who you play with Thomas Chabot if Jensen's injured, which I think is going to be an interesting storyline as camp devolves. But I think for me, the one area that I'm really interested in, and I'm curious what you think, is the goaltending. Because I don't know if you saw Linus Ullmark, but his comments in Vegas, but he was kind of talking about, hey, I want to be like bounce back. I want to make Team Sweden, because he wanted to go to the World Championships. They said no to him. He didn't have a stellar 4 Nations. I wouldn't say his playoffs were very good either, right? Which has been a track record for him so far. He has that big payday. He hasn't been healthy or hasn't played a full season. Like there's a lot of question marks. Like I don't think they're going to be what they were before Linus Ullmark, which was basically the worst goaltending unit for almost half a decade. But if he's not healthy, if he's not great, like it's going to be interesting to see. You have Levi Marilainen behind him, which I believe in, but it's kind of like, you in Calgary, like Dustin Wolf just got a huge contract. He has shown a lot of promise, but you are making a big bet on him, right? And the Sens did that with Marilainen. So I'm just curious, like what you think about their goaltending heading into
I think you bring up a really good point with Linus Ullmark, who, I mean, even if you go back to the start of last season, it was not perfect. And then you go into November where it looked as if the wheels were going to fall off. Like Linus Ullmark's play was not great. I don't want to say he was the reason why the team was in the hole that they were in, but he did not help them out of that hole. And then in December, he goes on one of the best stretches of the season, if not his best stretch of the season. He should have been goalie of the month if it wasn't for Jacob Markstrom in December. But I think for him to recognize that there's pressure to put on his shoulders, he's doing himself, hopefully for him in a healthy way. But I can understand why he would want to do that, considering how he started the year. For whatever reason, I'm not as worried as much about Linus Ullmark for whatever reason, just because he has shown at points last year that he can be the number one guy. I wonder about Levi Merrilainen and the potential workload for him as the backup, because if it doesn't work for him for whatever reason, is Matt Sogard the guy you want to plug? He's number 3 on that depth chart, and I don't know if he's been the model of consistency in the little bit of time I've seen him. And then you just have AHL guys out there, right? And young, unproven talent below that, right? Like usually for teams that want to make the playoffs and be true playoff teams, you want your goaltending. You obviously want you need a goalie to get you through. It doesn't have to be the goalie, but you want to make sure the bodies you have in place, no matter what happens, are able to get you through. I can understand the pressure being put on a guy like Linus Ullmark, who will be going into the first year of that big money extension he signed last year. He just has to go out and prove it. But I also just think that the way the team is built in front of him should hopefully help him in that regard. But I don't know. I think for Linus Ullmark, I'm pretty confident that he's going to be good this year. I could be wrong, but I just think the fact that like he's played at a high level before, he won a Vezina, and I get it. That was at a time when he was splitting the net a little bit with a Jeremy Swayman, but I think this is a guy who understands what it takes to play at this high level. And I don't have him high on my level of concerns necessarily, not compared to who's going to fit on a top line, where's Jordan Spence going to play in this defense. Like they dealt with their goaltending. Linus Ullmark is an upgrade over everyone else they've had over the last how many years, as you mentioned. And I don't know, good on him that he's pressured, but like just maybe this is more for prediction than anything. I don't think the Senators should have to worry about Linus Ullmark entering this year. My expectation for him is that he is brought in to do the job, and he should be further from everyone's worries. But, you know, things could always change.
The one thing that I keep thinking about is that he really had these like highs and lows, right? And that's happens in goaltending.
He did.
Like, tucks it off guys and, hits off someone's back behind, goes in, and now your save percentage and goals against looks terrible, right? But I just think the injury history too, like he got injured a couple times. He's heading into his 30s. Like just all of that kind of subsumed makes me worried. And kind of my hot take for the season that I've been thinking about is not that I'm trying to have any ill will for Linus Ullmark. I hope he has a wonderful season, but I'm really curious about Levi Merrilainen. Like I could see a world where Ullmark struggles or is injured and Merrilainen plays close to how he did last year. And then we say, okay, who's the number one going into the playoffs or going down the stretch? Like I think there's a world where that happens. And the other thing that you mentioned with Matt Sogard is I think they need to bring in another goaltender that just solidifies the third, who's your third goaltender, because Ullmark has that injury history. It's not like Connor Hellebuck, who plays 66 games a year and is never injured. Like Ullmark has basically battled with injuries for the majority of his career. So I think that's one interesting thing that I could see it going awry more so than maybe other people think, but hopefully not, right? Like, and I don't think they're in a position where you're like, oh my God, the Sens goaltending is going to be like a complete issue, but I could see it taking a nosedive a little bit compared to last year, where I think they had the 10th best save percentage. But I think one thing that I want to touch upon is who is this team's
wait, before you get to that, I just want to say, like, not to bring up the Calgary Flames again, but like I liked what they did last year when it was Dustin Wolf, Dan Vladar, and they signed Devin Cooley, who was essentially a tweener. So he had a little bit of time in San Jose. And I mean, if Dustin Wolf wasn't going to pan out to be the guy you could always say you have a veteran goaltender who could tap in. Ultimately, we know what happened with Dustin Wolf, has himself a successful season. I guess the Sens kind of did that with Hunter Shepard in the American Hockey League, who will likely shoulder the load of a lot of starts down in Belleville. We know Jackson Parsons was signed as a free agent too. Like, it's not to say there aren't goalies at all. It's just I think for this team, and you bring up a good point with the health with Linus Ullmark, you're better off having depth than not. And I think they might have been better off getting like a more proven, veritable, I guess at least a tweener, like a guy who has some veteran experience who you can play in the AHL, and then at a moment's notice you have him up at the NHL level to even just to back up, just to have that stability. Think of a guy like an Oscar Dansk type who know he could play AHL minutes, but if you really need to put him in that moment for the NHL, you have somebody, you have a veteran body there. And hey, maybe again, Shepard, maybe he ends up being the guy, but I don't know. I get it with Linus Ullmark. Maybe it's a little bit just anxiety at the position, but they paid him to be the guy. I expect him to be the guy. I'm not necessarily. I mean, if you're going to worry about him getting injured, you could apply that to so many other people on this roster, right? Like,
sure,
Brady Tkachuk missed like 10 games last year with all the talk about him playing banged up. He only missed 10 regular season games, and when it came time for him to play in the playoffs, he still balled out, even though he was not at 100%. I mean, one bad injury on this team, and then that's it. But if you live in that world, I don't know, you start opening up a whole window of other possibilities, so to speak. But I think for this Sens team, I don't know why. Maybe it's just me. I don't see Linus Ullmark as the biggest worry. He knows himself better than anybody that he needs to step up. If it gets to a point where we enter November and he's not playing well, then that's the storyline you have to delve in on and carve into him. But good on him that he understands the situation that's in front of him. Levi Merilainen, the one last thing I'll add on him, the fact that he played the role essentially as a season savior last year, and he was just cool about it the whole time, that's going to help him in a season where he'll likely get it'll be a 70-30 split or 65-35 split in terms of percentages. You let him just kind of increase that time, I think he'll be all right too. Goaltending, for me in my head with this team, is not the biggest area of concern. It's scoring, it's everything up front and what they can do there.
I'm curious, like, and I totally agree with that. I think it's more like the depth, right? And I think Steve Sales has mentioned that, or the past 2 years, he's like, okay, I felt like because Pierre Doran traded away every single pick for a couple years, like we don't have enough there, kind of in the cupboards in the AHL. Like I'm going to recoup some depth. I'm going to add players, and the team this year, I think, organizationally has way more depth than it did last year, but I still don't think it's that deep, especially at certain positions. And the goaltending's one where I think they don't have the third goalie. But I'm curious for you, like how this team can improve upon what they struggled with last year, which mostly was scoring at 5-on-5, right? And they essentially brought back the same team, which is an interesting thing, right? Is like, hey, like we feel like we are better at 5-on-5, but we are bringing back the same cast of players, right? It's like, how can that work?
I'm curious about that too. And they're really hoping that Fabian Zetterlund benefits from starting the season in Ottawa, and the same deal for Dylan Cozens. I've seen people wonder aloud, like, oh, is it time for Dylan? And I'm saying fans, not like media or anyone else. Like people wondering, hey, like, do you get Dylan Cozens going by putting him on the wing? Do you put Shane Pinto on the wing? And I'm just like, I mean, we gotta let's wait out a couple things first. But I can understand from the Sens standpoint about why they feel comfortable knowing that with Zetterlund and Cozens in the fold, with them getting a full season, hopefully for them under their belt at the start of the year onto the end of it, maybe that'll help that charge. We have to see it to believe it, but I still just think that when it comes time, if this team wants to put itself on a completely different echelon, they have to go get that sniper, a proven goal scorer who they could just set and forget on that top right side or left side, depending on wherever Fabian Zetterlund fits. I mean, I don't think this is a bold prediction. I see him. He should be this team's top line right winger. If it doesn't pan out for him there, got a bit of questions about where he fits in terms of whether it's a second line spot for him at that point. Is Claude Giroux going to have to be the guy on the top line there? What do they do with that? But Fabian Zetterlund, it should be his job to lose, to play alongside Tim Stützle.
I mean, the one thing I'm interested in, and you mentioned it with the Zetterlund piece, like the Giroux, Stützle, Kachuk line has just been dominant the past couple years,
Yeah.
even as Giroux's taking us, step back in his game. While obviously Kachuk, who had a down year last year for offensively, but I think was a better player, and obviously Timmy had a great season last year. I think that's going to be the interesting dynamic. Is they're kind of at this place where they have too many right wingers, and I guess Zetterlund prefers the left too, but they don't really have like clear cut roles for a Fabian Zetterlund. Like you look at the lineup and you're like, okay, you can mix and match, and Travis Green loves to do that, and he would tell you that all the time. Like, we'll see, anything can change at any time, right?
Mhm.
Which I think is a good coaching philosophy, but I do think you're right. This team is like another like bona fide 30, 35, 40 goal scorer away from being like you think, okay, they're really good. But I
Yeah.
think the bet that Steos is making, and I think it's not a bad one, is that you look at the team and they're all young, right? And Travis Green talked about last year at training camp how I'm just going to focus on defensive fundamentals, right? And this year, like he said, I'm going to try to open things up a little bit. And I'm really curious to see how he opens it up and in terms of how that affects this team. Do they maybe slip 15% defensively, especially with their top guys, but they score 35, 40% more with Tim Stützle Brady that have a bit more of a leash? Or does it go the bad way where they're too open and then now they're getting scored on all the time and all the bad habits revert back? So I think the good thing is that they have Tim Stützle and Jake Sanderson, who are not even 24. And they seem to be scratching the surface as to how good they can be. And I think you take that bet, that just almost inertia of being young and improving every year should make this team better 5-on-5. But how much? And how much does maybe playing a bit more offensive as a whole as a team? How much does that add to it? I don't know what that answer is, but I think
Yeah.
that's
We're
the
gonna get
bet
a
that
better picture of
scales.
that when we watch them in game situations in camp. But to your point about if they get themselves to a point where they open up and maybe they suffer a bit defensively, if it gets to a point where it's a bit much, I would think since it's the second year of Travis Green, in terms of reverting to bad habits, Travis Green, I think with what he tried to instill in the team last year defensively, his first thought would probably be like, you know what? We're getting back to basics, simplifying the game, and going back to what worked for us last year as a foundation before they open things up again. If it gets to that point where, for whatever reason, maybe they're a little bit too loose offensively just because of whatever they instill. But again, that's something we're just going to have to see once training camp starts. I'm very interested. You mentioned Claude Giroux earlier. This is a player who, you're right, played a huge role on that top line with Kachuk and Stützle. But ever since he's joined the team, his statistics have trended downward, and he's not getting any younger. He does an incredible job keeping himself in shape. But is that the player you want on your top line? I think if it gets to a point where some of the options they want to put up there don't work out, yeah, you could put him there. He's still a really good face-off man. But for this team to really be at the level they want to be at, when we both heard Brady Kachuk say they want more than just making the playoffs, is top line Claude Giroux the guy? I don't know. I think in a perfect world, third line right winger, you put him on that same line with Ridley Gregg and Shane Pinto, and you bump down Michael Amadio. That's what I think would happen, but I'm not the head coach. I just think
Yeah.
for a guy like Claude Giroux, in terms of the depth that you mentioned, having him as a depth guy would be strong for this team. Fabian Zetterlund, I know I mentioned what I said about him playing top line, but in a perfect world where you acquire that guy, having him as like a middle six winger who can put in points and be physical, the Ottawa Senators look a lot stronger. They have the pieces. It's just you need one more star. And then on defense, I'm not going to harp about forwards anymore. I've done that enough. But in terms of defense, like we're on the same page. Jake Sanderson's going to take that step and just continue to establish himself as a star. And this, I don't think it's something that's just Ottawa reporters
No.
blowing smoke. This is the rest of the league, I think, also catching up as well. Like he's still working on things with his skilled coach, Jonathan Sigalet, and just trying to get himself to a point where he can continue to get better. That worked out for him in the second half of the year to now. So yeah, and Jordan Spence obviously wanting opportunities for himself after what happened in LA. I don't know. I'm very curious about the offense that they could generate there from the back end too, and the fact that I don't think he's going to be like a day one power play option. But if they need to go to Jordan Spence, they could see what offensive ability is tapped in on his side. A relatively young, I mean, still a pretty young player that they could plug in wherever to kind of tap into that skill set. Like I think there's a possibility that there's an improvement offensively from their defense, which is pretty fun to say when you consider what defense is supposed to do. But Jordan Spence being that upgrade over Travis Hamonic, as you mentioned earlier, like that's already a win in itself. Like that could be the biggest spot of improvement for this team.
No, I definitely agree. And something that you mentioned with the Spence edition is that I know for a fact, like the Sens organization realized, and I think rightfully so, that hey, we like the right side of our defense last year, but
Mm-hmm.
we're not generating enough offense from that side. I think they were
Mm-hmm.
bottom 5 in goals from defensemen, and it was basically Jake Sanderson and Thomas Chabot, and then everyone else had like 2 or 3 goals, which is, I'm not trying to besmirch any of those guys, but Artem Zub is not driving play in the offensive zone. Nick Jensen is a good puck handler, great, great skater, but he's not generating. That's what Jordan Spence does. He
Mm-hmm.
keeps ozone possession. He creates plays. He creates offense. And I think, a lot of times the Sens not only getting out of their own zone from the right side, but in the offensive zone from the right side, it would kind of like the puck would go to Sanderson, he'd throw it over to Zub or Jensen, and then the play would kind of die,
Yeah.
right? And I think just having another guy that can create more options, more ozone time, I think creates more opportunities, more chances. And I think in a weird way, Spence, I don't think he's going to have 50 points or anything like that, but I think his impact offensively could be much more than people might think, just because this team, I think, is lacking in that area. And if you get pucks up to the forwards more often, they're going to have more chances. And I think that's what's going to happen with Jordan Spence. I'd love to see him with Jake Sanderson, especially if Jensen's injured. I
Yeah.
don't really like a Spence Chabot. And this is like September 10th. We're getting a bit too early into like prognostications about lines, but
I mean, camp is in a week. I don't think it's that early. To your point,
mhm.
to your point, like I think at some point in camp we are going to see a Sanderson Spence pairing. I don't think it's going to be set in stone, but I think the team is going to try that at some point. For me, it's either Jordan Spence is getting minutes on a top pairing, or you put him on a third pairing with Tyler Clevin. Like, I think for Thomas Chabot, it's either going to be Nick Jensen if he's healthy, or they bump down Artem Zub to that second pairing. And I think the fact that there's all this potential with Jordan Spence, even if he doesn't turn into like a 40, 50 point player, even like the 20 something points he had in LA, if he just replicated that production, that's an improvement from what they had in the depth defenseman they had before. Like I still think that's a really big position of strength for them. Maybe you could use a little bit more size at the back end. That's probably the one thing that they're really missing. And I mean, for them, they're hoping that a guy like Carter Yakimchuk can fill that void, and then Logan Hensler down the line. But I think in terms of generating offense, having an option like a Jordan Spence, who, as of now, like his position on this team, I mean, you could fit him in a whole bunch of other different possibilities. That's a win. I think they have something they can unlock in Jordan Spence. There's some talent there, whether it's on a first pairing, whether it's on a third pairing. Just the fact that you could put him in. I mean, unfortunately for a guy like Nicholas Montemapalo, he might suffer a bit as a result of it, where he might just permanently be the number 7. But also, I think for Montemapalo, the skating is surprisingly better than what I thought for a guy of his frame. And he played really well with Tyler Clevin, and they have familiarity going back to the AHL. Like, if they have to tap him in at any point, like, that's also not a loss. You also upgraded at your number 7 defenseman if Nicholas Montemapalo is that guy. Like, I really thought that addition of Jordan Spence was good for them. Maybe not a full-on home run, but a base hit. Sure. And sometimes in life, you want to get on base. So I like what they were able to have with Jordan Spence at the back end. It's just a question of where they fit him. But I think we're going to see, I don't know if it's set in stone. I don't know if it's going to get to a point where day 1 of the season in Florida, or against Tampa, I should say, they're going to have Spence and Sanderson together. But I do believe at some point in camp, we're going to see that at least attempted.
Yeah. And the other thing I think, I'm sure you remember at the end of games by the end of the season, Travis Green would roll out Shabbat and Sanderson all the time to create offense when the team was trailing. I think now you have Spence as that other guy that you don't necessarily need to with Shabbat and Spence as a duo,
Mhm.
or same with Sanderson. But I think the one area, like, and I completely agree. I think it's with Steos, the moniker Steady Steve Steos. But I think he has hit a lot of singles that have turned into runs, right? I think
Mhm.
David Perron obviously had such a hard start to last season for, everything unrelated to hockey, but by the end of the year, he scored that big goals, made big plays, obviously the goal in game 6 where it felt like they were gonna somehow make that reverse sweep, but you look at Michael Amadio, he was a really effective third, fourth line player. Bringing in Nick Jensen's for Jacob Chikrin. Obviously, you look talent wise, they're not one for one, but Jensen was a way better fit than Chikrin. You look at Allmark, all the solidifying the goaltending position. Obviously, that's a big addition, and obviously the Cousins trade was big as well with Norris. But I think he just hit a lot of like just good deal, good deal, good deal that has kind of a mass into where the team is right now. And I think he deserves a lot of credit to where this team's at. And it's going to be interesting to see because he has taken those big swings, but this team doesn't have their first round pick this year. If
Mhm.
they're good at the deadline, last deadline, he made some big swings, but is he going to be able to? I don't know. Yeah, obviously, we're a bit ahead of it, but the one area on defense that I'm a bit worried about, just depth wise, is the left side because you love Shabbat, Sanderson, Clevin. I think they're really good in the positions they are in, in the lineup. But after that, there's Donovan Zabrango, and shout out to his mom who's always supporting him, local kid. But I don't know if he's ready to play 25 games in the NHL if someone gets hurt, right? So
Mhm.
I wonder, Murray Pam asked Steos about PTOs. Uh, if he doesn't bring in a left shot defenseman PTO, I'll be surprised. I think he probably knows that's an area to address.
Yeah, I think that side, you're right. That side could totally use some more depth, whether it's a PTO guy just to kind of see what you have in him, or you sign him to like a two-way deal or something where you could just kind of keep him around and kind of call him up if you need just to have that experience. But maybe it just turns into a situation where maybe you don't get it from your first round pick, but from the remaining picks you have in the upcoming draft, maybe you think, hey, is there a way we could prioritize getting a left shot to help out? Or hey, if there's someone else out there ahead of the deadline, it doesn't have to be a massive deal because look, Steve Stais has also accumulated some salary cap flexibility. And I know with the new rules coming in with the salary cap and the playoffs and all that, maybe it's a bit neutralized, but having that salary cap space still way better than what they were doing last year, where Adam Gaudette was getting yo-yoed between the NHL and the AHL in the first month of the season, right? Like, I think for them to be in a position where they could enter the deadline with much more cap space and at least be able to accommodate someone, even just for depth reasons, who brings some ability or some size, just at the end of the day, as a baseline, just some depth for that left side. The Senators have, at the very least, given themselves opportunities of flexibility to add that piece should they make themselves available. Absolutely.
For sure. The one player that I keep thinking about and about his impact this year and how well he plays is Dylan Cozens. Because as you mentioned, Steos made that big deal for him, trading away, fan favorite Josh Norris, who was playing well for the most part last season, but was always injured, got injured in Buffalo. Like Cousins hasn't had any real injury history, but I would say his play down the stretch was good, and then kind of went down a little bit. And then in the playoffs, I didn't think he played particularly great. He had the big goal in Game 5, but Travis Green was basically playing him as a third line center, essentially
Mhm.
trusting Shane Pinto's line to go up against Matthews and Marner. I think he's almost like the litmus test or like the barometer of like how good this team is. Like if Dylan Cousins I'm not saying he has to score 30 goals, but if he's closer to that, which he produced, I think, in the 22-23 season, I think this team's humming. But if he's closer to that 15, 18, 19, 20 goals, still maybe not the greatest defensively, I don't know how good this team can be. Like for me, it's like if Cousins is great, I don't know how this team's bad, or isn't like really good to say the very least. And if he struggles, then you can see how this team, goes down that same pathway. So I'm curious what you think about him and maybe how much confidence you have in terms of how good he can be as an Ottawa Senator this season.
When you hear the organization make comments about how the team needs to take a step, I feel you could make the argument that there's no player on this team who needs to take a bigger step than that guy because of what the Sens had to do to acquire him at the deadline, because of his placement, at least, projected anyway on the on the group of forwards. I also think of how fans kind of view him in the offseason, where fans obviously are becoming armchair GMs and drawing up different teams in their own image, and they're putting Dylan Cozens in trade discussions or trade proposals. And I'm like, you just got this guy a couple months ago and you want to move him in a deal for Mason McTavish. Like, whether that deal works or not, I mean, that's just where they're at with this player. And he's only been on the team for a small amount of time. And he scored that big goal in game 5, but we're all looking at his playoffs as if, just not that great. I think there's still like a ceiling for him to tap into, to still reach for. And I think he knows that. I think he's probably well aware of the potential that surrounded him when he entered the league and the performances he was able to put on coming up, entering his time with the Buffalo Sabres. And I wonder too, with some of the metrics that are out there with his play defensively, how much of that is on him with a lot of the shots that are being generated against him when he's on the ice versus the quality of line mates he had in Buffalo, right? Like he wasn't on the best of teams. There were some teams that were better than some, but I wonder how much of his sagging defensive metrics are because of the players he played with in Buffalo compared to what he has in Ottawa. But to your point, like, yeah, defensively, we're going to be looking at that a lot. And the fact that a guy like, I'll push back on the Shane Pinto thing only because, yes, like maybe Dylan Cozens should have been better defensively, but I also think it was the plan entering the playoffs as well that Shane Pinto was going to be that guy who was going to get top billing minutes against some of the best Leafs players. We saw how that line was playing entering the postseason with Ridley Gregg and Michael Amadio. Like, I think that situation was more Travis Green entering the playoffs, knowing that he had Shane Pinto in the bag who can take over those minutes, versus Dylan Cozens being entrusted with that, and then Travis Green having to pivot to Shane Pinto to make that work. And for what it's worth, too, I mean, yes, I think because of the fact Shane Pinto played defensively, plays a role in that too. I'm pretty sure both of those guys had the same amount of points at the end of the postseason as well. So yeah, I think Dylan Cozens, there's a reason why the Sens coveted him: the size, the right shot ability, the familiarity with guys on this team already through his time with Hockey Canada. Like, I still think there's a potential he could still have a really good season, and that's on him to decide. We know he worked out with Sam Gagner at his Muskoka camp. I'm very curious to learn from him what he gathered from that, and what Sam Gagner has to think about what he was able to see out of him and get out of him this summer in Muskoka. I think there's an argument, if you're looking at guys on this team, and I'm not saying it's definitely him, I'm saying an argument can be made that if you're looking at this team and you're saying all these players need to step up, there's an argument to be made that Dylan Cozens has the most pressure of all to step up, because Tim Stützle is a really good player. You just need him to knock on the door of superstardom. Brady Tkachuk has proven himself to be a really solid player, really great player on this team, if not the face of this team as the captain and spokesperson. Jake Sanderson, we've hyped him up enough. Dylan Cozens, there's still some unrealized potential there. And if it goes the way as it's gone for so many other guys who played for the Buffalo Sabres, there's a lot. I think the Ottawa Senators are going to be very happy in what they got in return.
And that's the one thing that you mentioned, is like his defensive analytics in Buffalo, and like how every good player or high draft pick in Buffalo leaves and then proceeds to win cups and be amazing. But for me, I look more to the way he played down the stretch and in the playoffs. And I think the point you made about how much of Travis Green playing Shane Pinto over Dylan Cozens in terms of those big matchups is less of an indictment of Dylan Cozens and more as, giving credit to Shane Pinto, who I think is going to be in Selke nominations this year and get votes at least. I think this year.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at his defensive impacts and that the fact that he's up against the top guys in the league, like he was amazing against Marner and Matthews. And I think he's really good. I think it's going to be a really interesting year for him specifically
Mhm.
because he's essentially going into a contract year. Uh, he just made the Team USA like preliminary roster, which it is what it is. But he wasn't playing on the top power play unit or on the power play at all, really, down the stretch. He has a great shot. He wants to have good numbers offensively to get paid, but his role on this team is essentially to be like the defensive ace, right? And that doesn't necessarily get you paid. So I'm curious to see how he embraces his role and if Travis Green's like, hey, like I know to make you happy, I'm going to give you, more time on the second power play unit a little bit, or maybe playing up a little bit more down the stretch of games as a winger, or maybe essentially playing more so in the final stretch of games because he thinks he has that shot that gets him 20 goals. It seems like every time he plays a full season. Like I think it's going to be really interesting to see how he plays this year, and also if he gets a contract extension, what that looks like. What would you, if you're Steve Stais, like what contract would you
Man.
be willing to give Shane Pinto?
Like I would want to sign him long term, and especially just to your point about him being a defensive ace who's still able to get you 20 goals a season. Like those guys get paid. Maybe not like an overwhelming amount, like Kirill Kaprizov numbers, but those guys get paid. And Shane Pitt, it's one thing if this guy was like, oh, he's really good defensively, but he'll get you 10, 15. There's a world where Shane Pinto scores 25. And on this team,
30.
again, with 30 even, and on this team that could use the goal scoring, you pay for that. So I think for a guy like Shane Pinto, I love him on that line where Ridley Gregg is left to him. He had Amadio there. It worked out, and he was still able to produce offensively. And even at shorthanded as well. He didn't get power play time, but he found ways to score shorthanded goals, on counterattacks as well. Like, there's some offensive potential in that guy. I see people say, like, oh, man, maybe you put him as a wing, maybe you bump him up. But like, I also think if he's able to thrive in the role that he's in, I don't know if you really need to fiddle around with it that much. But hey, maybe that's also dictating on how well Dylan Cozens plays as well too. I think this year is a prove it year. If Shane Pinto has had all these things go for him, we didn't even mention his role on Team USA at the World Championship last spring. Helps them win the World Championship for the first time in like 92 years. Like he played a massive role on that team to get them to that point. If he continues that, and like say he starts the season and he starts going on a tear, if I'm Steve Stais, do I really want that to go into the offseason and then you're stuck kind of giving him even more money if he continues that trend? Like, I'd find a way to sign him long term. I think you set him and forget him as your middle sixth center you could have on a second or third line, depending on who's there. And you just let him thrive in your organization. He's a good young star who still has potential to realize. Like I would sign him long term if I was Steve Stais. I don't think I've only been around the organization for a year, but off of what I've seen, he's a really important part of what this team is able to do at both ends of the ice. And I mean, if you're Shane Pinto, you enter this year knowing that you can do all those things you've shown in the past. If you get that power play time, sure, maybe you just capitalize on those opportunities. But I think that young man's going to get paid. This is going to end with him getting paid, and this is going to end with him, I think, with a longer contract.
And he seems pretty like I don't want to speak for Shane Pinto, but he likes being like he's grown up with all these guys, all the UND guys that they played university with. Um, I think he likes Ottawa for the most part, and I think he'd be open to it for sure. I don't think he's like gonna to ask leave, but obviously he wants to get paid. And if I'm Steve Sales, like obviously I think you're right. You should be trying to negotiate now rather than later because I think, the price of the brick is only going up, the longer the season goes on. But to me, the one fascinating thing is if you sign him, let's say you sign him, let's say 5x5, 6x6. I don't know what he's asking for. I don't know what the Sens are thinking. But in that kind of 5, 6, 7 year deal, you have and Dylan Cozens plays decently well this season. You have your center depth locked up for like the next half decade, and they're only entering their primes during those contracts. Like you're not paying for them to be 34, 35. You're paying for them to be play up until their early 30s. Like the whole the whole of their primes. And I think that's just such a good way to like manipulate the cap to be in a great position to add other players down the line, not just this season, but for future years. So I think if you're Steve Stais, you should sign him to, as long of a contract for like a decent amount of money. Cause I think he's gonna be worth 5-6 million as like an ace defensive player who can score 20 goals and with the rising cap. I just don't think how you miss on that contract. I think it's a pretty, you know, low bar for like I don't see him regressing and becoming all of a sudden like not a useful player.
I think you tell me if I'm wrong. There are maybe 3 teams in the Atlantic who have a better center depth on paper than the Sens do.
Who outside of Florida, who do you think?
I
Maybe.
mean, Matthews, Tavares in Toronto is really good.
Yep.
Tampa,
And
what
Watt,
you have? Sorry, what?
Nicholas Watts, I guess now they're third line center, so they actually have
Like,
one in Toronto. But
so then
yeah,
you have what about Tampa with guys like Sorelli in the fold, and I mean, yeah, Braden Point I guess could be there too. Like, well, not I guess could be there. Like, he'd be there. I mean, they've won. They've proved like, yeah, you're what are we doing here? I think it's just those 3 teams really. Like, and I don't think that's like earth shattering to say, but if those, particularly Cousins and Pinto, if they take that step going into next year, and even Tim Slitsla too, like we start asking questions if that center depth is actually top 3. Like
yep.
they're knocking out the door. Like that's a really good foundation for this organization to have Slitsla as your number 1 center, and then Cousins and Pinto as your 2 and 3. Like I think that's really good for any
Yeah.
young team coming up. Like I wouldn't mess with that. I wouldn't fiddle with that.
No.
They just have to go out there and do their job.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you look at the team and you think, okay, if they sign Shane Pinto, they're going to be good for a long time. Like I had Dean Brown on the podcast yesterday, and he's like, yeah, I think this team's going to be good for a long time. Like they're set up for success. And you do that, you sign Shane Pinto. I don't know how you're not going to be at least a playoff team for the next half decade. And I think I don't know if I trust Steve Stais because that's not how I see the world, but I do have enough faith or belief in his decision making so far that I think he probably knows like that's probably the right approach to sign him to at least a significantly long-term deal in that 4, 5, 6 year range. And I think it'll probably happen. And if that happens, it'll be an interesting storyline because I think he's really setting up this team for success. And he hasn't like think about a really bad contract he signed so far. I know it's only been 2 years, but not really. I think the biggest one you would say is maybe Allmark, but it kind of made sense. And again, the term isn't that long. It's only 4 years. So you're basically paying for him in his, mid to late prime. So Julian, before I let you go.
There are worse
Yeah.
deals to sign than for a goalie who is only a few years removed from winning a Vezina, who maybe could be a little bit better in the regular season. Definitely needs to step up in the playoffs, but still was way better than any goalie you've had in the last decade. I don't think that.
It's not even close.
Not even close. If that's the worst deal he has right now, I would say that Steve Stais' batting average is still pretty good. It could change, and I still think that if he doesn't make any other move to get that other top 6 guy, we look at this differently. And I think it's important that, especially in our jobs where we keep hearing him say like, "Hey, I believe in this core. I believe in this core." We have to keep asking questions about if that belief is justified. But I'm willing to give him some credit and say that the way that he's gone about things in Ottawa so far, it's worked out. He's made some good moves. It's just a matter of if he can continue to make those good moves.
I completely agree. And I think this season will be, in a sense, okay, they've done it once. If they do it again pretty emphatically and they come top 3 in the Atlantic, or they're like clearly a playoff team, they're not fighting to get in at the end. I think you think to yourselves, okay, he's really like usurped this team from like a broken franchise to one that is set to be really good for a long time. And I think he deserves a lot of credit. Obviously, he didn't draft Tim Stützle and Brady Tkachuk and take a leap of faith on Jake Sanderson, but he's done the right things around the edges to make this team good and sustainable. And I think he deserves a lot of credit. But I think the hardest thing, as I'm not a manager, never will be likely, but is to make the right next decision. Like you can build
Exactly.
that foundation, but then what's that next decision might make Rome fall, right? So we'll see what happens with Steve. Before I let you go, you have a book coming out, and I'd love to kind of let you promote it and just you talk about it, because being around you last year, and I know the grind of, well, I don't know what the grind of
I was
writing a
about to
book
say,
is. I think
do you have a book
no,
deal on the
no, I do
horizon? Are you
not.
working on a
No.
book, sir?
No, I don't think so. I'll write your biography. That's what I'll do one day.
No,
I'm
no,
kidding.
no, that's not happening. That's not happening. I don't need one of those. Yeah, I'm writing a book. Well, I've already written it. I'm proofreading it right now. Black Aces, just a book featuring a series of profiles on important Black players in the history of hockey, male or female. A couple different people who have been profiled for this: Jerome McGinley, Sarah Nurse, Kevin Weeks. Willie O'Ree, obviously, there's going to be a chapter on him. Herb Carnegie, I really want people to read about his story as well. But other names too, like Georges Larac and Anson Carter as well. Kelsey Kozler, who was the first Black player to be drafted first overall in any North American hockey draft when she was drafted first overall in the NWHL. Blake Bolden as well. It was really cool. Angela James is also in the book too. Even if some of the names I mentioned in terms of chapters, maybe you're hearing this and you're thinking, oh man, like, what about Mike Greer? Or what about Duclair? Or what about Simmons? Like, those guys are mentioned in the book too. And I think it's just important to have a book like this just for, we're at a time where we're seeing more and more diversity start to show itself in the game of hockey. And I think it's important that people realize that this isn't just something that came out of nowhere. And if you look through the history of this sport, you'll see not only prominent players who are Black, whether as scorers, whether as fighters or physical players or what have you, but you look even further back, even some of the innovations we know today, like the slap shot, we can associate Black hockey players to that too. So I hope people enjoy it when it comes out February 3rd in 2026. That's going to be a really big day. I've wanted to write a book since I was 6 years old. So I'm really, really, when I was really young, I was saying when I was 6 years old, like I wanted to do a lot of things when I was 6 years old. I wanted to be a journalist when I was 6 years old. So yeah,
Cool.
When I was really young, I wanted to write a book, but like, yeah, this is a project that really means a lot to me. And I put a lot into this and I can't wait until people get their hands on it, and you can pre-order it wherever books are sold. So yeah, that's been taking up a lot of my time. And when I get off this call, I'm probably going to go back into proofreading the second version of my manuscript so we can get this bad boy out.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm really excited to read it.
Thanks, man.
It's going to be, a great launch, I'm sure. And yeah, it's going to be, it's great just to see where the game's evolved. Obviously, you know it better than me, but just to see much more diversity in the game, much more just cool stories, unique paths that, everyone should be able to play the game of hockey no matter who you are. And
1000%.
it's just great to see, and hopefully more to come down the line. And it's great that you're kind of giving this great kind of historical viewpoint of the growth and the stories and the plights and the heroes that have kind of made hockey better than it is from the past. So Julian, thanks so much for sharing about your book and giving us some Sens topics to talk about, and I'll see you later at the rink.
All right, man. Thanks so much for having me, and I'll chat with you soon.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Sens Spotlight on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.